There have been a lot of debates about boycotting the Beijing Winter Olympics. People who support a boycott cite the communist regime's abysmal human rights record and the recent sexual assault allegation by Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai. Those who oppose it say boycotting the Games won't solve any geopolitical issues. They use the 1980 boycott of the Moscow Olympics as an example of failure. I think a kid may have better discernment of this problem than these adults. Hi everyone, welcome to my show. I'm Lei. After the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979, the United States led 65 countries, including China, to boycott the 1980 Moscow Games. Many experts say that it was fruitless because it didn't result in a Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan. I don't see it this way. I think it was a great success because 11 years later, communism collapsed in the Soviet Union in 1991. If boycotting the Beijing Olympics today might result in the collapse of the CCP before the emergence of a democratic China, wouldn't you do it? It's quite simple. Even a child can understand it. So now let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a village called Earth. The second wealthiest man in the village had a reputation of beating his wife and children. As the beatings got out of hand, some neighbors tried to intervene. But this man always yelled, "It's my family affairs and none of your business." Sometimes when his children cried for help, some neighbors felt obligated to step in. The most outspoken one was Mr. Washington, the wealthiest man in the village. The guy who beat his wife and kids was Mr. Beijing. Every 4 years, people in the village hosted a sports game for the children, and all the families got together to celebrate their children's talents. The families took turns hosting the game. When it came time for Mr. Beijing to be the host, some parents were very concerned about sending their children to the Beijings because of how Mr. Beijing mistreated his family. Others feared Beijing's bad temper if they didn't show up. The whole village was on edge. The kids, however, didn't want to miss the opportunity to have some fun. They cried and whined. This gave the parents a big headache. Mr. Washington eventually said, "My kids are going, but I'm not." Mr. Canberra, Mr. London, Mr. Ottawa, and a few others liked the idea and joined Mr. Washington. This made Mr. Beijing indeed mad. He vowed revenge. However, in the village, Mr. Paris questioned Mr. Washington's tactic, and Mr. Rome agreed with him. Mr. Moscow, a good friend of the Beijings, was the first one who announced his support of Beijing. Some other families still hadn't decided. The village was divided. The Times magazine called Mr. Washington's diplomatic boycott divisive. The BBC questioned if Washington's action would matter. But in real life, the decision from any responsible parents would be a no-brainer. If I don't like how you treat your family and kids, I won't go to your party. And even a child would know that's the right thing to do. But in today's world, our heads of states become weak as soon as this line is uttered. Actually, from Nazi Germany to North Korea and Communist China, dictators love the pageantry of large-scale sports events because it enhances their badly needed PR image and empowers them politically. Only in authoritarian countries such as North Korea do we see mass games in which thousands of gymnasts perform perfectly synchronized moves. People become mere human pixels, glorifying their leaders. It's dictators who mix politics with sports, not the people who oppose them. The 1936 Berlin Olympics was a perfect example. It's now called the Nazi Olympics because Hitler used it to promote his Nazi party and his racial supremacy ideas. Before the Games, Jewish and Gypsy athletes were barred from German sports. Movements to boycott the Games surfaced in Europe and the United States. The debates about boycotting the Games were intense in the U.S. But Avery Brundage, who later became the president of the IOC for 20 years, and the only American who ever held that position, was against the boycott. After the Americans opted to participate, other countries followed and the boycott failed. On August 1st, 1936, Hitler opened the Games with great fanfares. It was the largest Games up to that point, with 49 countries participating. Some of the Olympic rituals that we see today started from the Nazi Games. Athletes marching into the stadium, country by country in alphabetic order, and a torchbearer running into the stadium to ignite the flame. However, the Nazis camouflaged their racist and militaristic policies during the Games. German newspapers toned down their harsh rhetoric. Hitler allowed one Jewish athlete, star fencer Helene Mayer, to compete as a token gesture to appease international criticism. She won a silver medal and gave the Nazi salute on the podium like all German medalists. Most visitors weren't aware that the regime had temporarily removed anti-Jewish signs, nor did they know of a police roundup of gypsies to a special camp in a Berlin suburb before the Games. Thus, the regime exploited the Olympic Games to present the false image of a peaceful, tolerant Germany. Similarly, the CCP also rounded up disgruntled workers, social justice petitioners, dissidents, and Falun Gong practitioners before the 2008 Beijing Olympics, in the name of Save Olympics. During the 7 months leading up to the 2008 Olympic Games, 586 Falun Gong practitioners were unlawfully arrested in the Beijing area. In the nearby city of Baoding, 362 were unlawfully detained. 3 of them died from abuse while in custody. In Nazi Germany, after the Games, the persecution of Jews resumed. 2 days after the Olympics, Captain Wolfgang Fürstener, head of the Olympic Village, committed suicide when he was dismissed from military service because he was a Jew. 3 years later, Germany invaded Poland in 1939. According to the Holocaust Encyclopedia, with the conclusion of the Games, Germany's expansionist policies and the persecution of Jews and other enemies of the state accelerated, culminating in the Holocaust. During the Tokyo Olympics last summer, the IOC apologized and deleted a tweet that some saw as celebrating the Nazis' 1936 Olympics. Avery Brundage, the leading force in America in opposing a boycott of the Nazi Olympics, is now called a hateful person. The Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, which houses an extensive collection donated by Brundage, removed his bust from display last summer. The Beijing Olympics Games will also hurt Chinese people economically. To ensure a blue sky during the Olympics, China's Ministry of Ecology and Environment has designated Beijing, Tianjin, and 26 nearby cities as the Olympics priority area between October 2021 and March 2022. Factories are shut down to meet certain air quality standards. Heavy-duty vehicles are prohibited on roads until after the Games. Some workers are given reduced pay and sent home early for the Lunar New Year break. I don't think a boycott is dividing us. I think the guy who beats up his wife and kids is dividing us when he uses money and intimidation to silence us. If the CCP launches a military attack on Taiwan after the Beijing Winter Olympics, which is a high probability, what will we call the sponsors of the 2022 Beijing Olympics? I think the world is not short of smart people, but it seriously needs people with high principles who will stand up for something. That's all for today. Thank you. I'll see you soon.